All right, hello, this is Ron Modern. This is the Gojutoshin Ryu Online Dojo weekly vlog. This week we are with Ty Yocham Shihan of Austin, Okinawan Karate. Welcome to the weekly vlog.
Thank you.
And could you give us just a brief introduction with rank, title, organization, affiliation, that sort of thing, please?
Yes, I am connected to the headquarters of the Shorei-Kan organization, headquartered in Japan. I am the first vice president of North America. The president of North America seat is in BC, Canada area.
Okay. And can you give us just sort of a brief history of particularly Shorei-Kan Goju? So the history of Goju is pretty well established with Miyagi and Higashionin and what have you. But then after Miyagi passed away, there were several branches of that, Shorei-Kan being one of those. Could you sort of explain to us how that came to be?
Yes, after Miyagi's passing, several of his senior students gathered together and developed curriculum of what they thought would be important for the basics of what Miyagi taught, and some of them added some of their contribution to it. Taguchi's contribution, from my point of view, is very unique in that that's where we start seeing the beginnings of the two-person sets being derived out of the kata. So as you see kata performed in a particular techniques within that kata, then you add a person and that becomes straight line, where you are, it's a formal, predictable two-person set, but all the techniques within the kata are being practiced in a basic manner to develop speed, rhythm, timing, body conditioning, and flow.
Okay. And the other systems as well sort of developed their own sort of two-man forms at some point. Is that right?
Yes, and we called application of kata bunkai, and so different designations are used to address those two-person sets. Some of them call them bunkai. If we break those two-person sets down and study the individual techniques within the kata, then you may see shorter segments of the application being used. And we address that as kaisai, and it's just the applications being engineered out of the kata to help better understand and study details of the katas.
So kaisai being interpretation of the techniques. Would that be?
Yes.
Okay. Um, all right. So what is it that sort of makes Shorei-Kan Goju distinct from other martial arts, but also distinct from other styles of Goju? Goju's one of the ones that's, especially Okinawan Goju, is fairly similar. Meibukan, I think, probably looks the most different from the other two. But what is it that, I mean, in Taekwondo you have the jumping, flying kicks, so you see that and sort of say, well, that's Taekwondo. Or Capoeira, you see the dancing around with the jinga and what have you, so you recognize that. What is it that you can recognize Goju Ryu in general, but specifically Shorei-Kan from among the other Goju Ryu styles?
That's a great question. The Shorei-Kan is unique in that Taguchi's vision of completing the curriculum that would fulfill Miyagi's vision. Miyagi shared with Taguchi that he would like to see 10 of the supplementary kata to be developed to help better study and understand the Koryu kata. And he was able to be a part, Miyagi was able to be a part of developing Gekisai Ich and Gekisai Ni, but he started a Gekisai San before his death. Taguchi finished the Gekisai San. He added in a more basic version of that in that Fuki Dai Ich and Dai Ni katas, And then he also went in and added back on top of that the kakuas, the geki hat, and then the hakutsuru kata as the number 10. But he developed overall, ensured the development of 10 supplementary kata to go along and match and help generate a higher level of understanding and preparedness to better study the 10 Koryu kata that are a part of the curriculum. Most Goju Ryu kata and some Shoin Ryu also still implement the Gekisai Ich and Gekisai Ni in their curriculums, but very few have the other supplementary kata added in as well. The two-person sets that go along with it are very unique. Other curriculums have merged that, and they don't match exactly the same methods as the Shorei-Kan, but it is essentially the same idea in that you're doing the techniques of the kata back and forth with the partner.
So for the supplementary kata, does a student learn those first before they start on Koru kata, or are there supplementary kata as they learn the Koru kata that sort of explain that? So that they learn the supplementary ones first, or is that just sort of put with the Koru kata as they learn to help them understand that?
A little bit of both, yes. The supplementary kata are what we start with. So before the student gets to the Koryu kata, they will have 3 or 4 of the supplementary kata already being practiced so that they can build that understanding. They are a little bit easier for us to start with as far as developing that systematic method of helping students grow, helping students evolve in an efficient method without it having shortcuts, but also in the most efficient method possible.
Okay, and just to be clear on what we're talking about for people who may be from other systems or what have you. So the Koru kata, those are the major kata of the system, the fighting kata of the system, which would be like Seisan, Saifa, Tsubarunpei, Chishoshin,
yes.
Things like that, as opposed to those supplementary kata, which were the Gekisai and the Gekihai, etc.
Yes, the Koryu kata are considered to be the classical subjects, and they are developed far enough back. They were the history of exactly where that kata came from is difficult to nail down because of how old they are and how long they've been around. So we can find some pieces of from cave drawings, and we can find some pieces of evidence that reflect that a kata such as maybe Sanchin dates back even to the BC era of our Earth.
Okay, and certainly when we talk about Koru, especially in Japan, Koru has very specific designation on that, and Goju Ryu is the only form of karate that is designated as a Koru. So it's designated as one of the old forms, and as I understand it, a lot of that has to do with Bubishi, or Bubishi, Chinese or the Japanese translation of that. And the techniques that are found in the Bubishi that are also found in the kata themselves, those Koru kata themselves,
yes.
which distinguishes Goju as one of the as a Koru.
Yes, there are several other curriculums that have stood the test of time, such as our Goju Ryu curriculum. The Shoin Ryu curriculum has stood the test of time from Okinawa, as well as the Uechi Ryu curriculum has been able to sustain and stand strong against the test of time. All of those curriculums are fine curriculums and very potent curriculums when it comes to good self-defense and combatives being emphasized. Most modern applications of martial arts these days are tested in a ring, and they are developed with the intent of one person against one person. But the older curriculums were developed during a time where they had to defend themselves against piracy and against whatever ship may be pulled into port because of the waters and the currents and how they run, many different cultures ended up passing through Okinawa, and so they had a lot of different testings for their martial arts.
Okay, so Okinawa is considered a part of Japan these days, and I guess it has been since the since the invasion of Okinawa by the Japanese.
Yes.
At least they considered it that way.
Yes.
However, I've heard before that among Okinawans, it's like, well, if you can't speak Hogan, right, then you can't understand karate. Um, in your own experience, how much of that is true? And I'm guessing that has to do with the way to explain something, because the Okinawan Hogan dialect is very different from Japanese.
Yes.
So the Okinawans developed a way to explain particular concepts within the system, and those same words may or may not exist in Japanese.
Correct.
Have you experienced that in your training at all, where you may have an understanding where you say, you really have to understand the Okinawan. That word doesn't really exist outside of that particular context, so you have to understand that term.
That there is a point of view that does hold that in place. However, the way a person moves their body, if they're moving their body in a manner that is kinesthetically powerful and correct, then the concepts transcend generations. The concepts even transcend through different curriculums. And so their language barrier, studying and training in anything that has a language barrier that's not your native tongue, can be difficult to understand, just as when I have students that don't speak English as their first language, it can be difficult to explain advanced concepts and understandings along the martial path. But it's just a challenge in to explain that concept. But it's not a challenge in understanding it once you're able to unify in the vocabulary and what the vocabulary represents and the concepts and ideas represent.
So the training will give you the answer to what that term, for something like muchimi, right, or jikishi, or something like that,
Yes.
where those terms exist in Okinawan, but we may have a different sort of interpretation. They may have a more complex definition in that language, but once you're going through the system and learning the system, you're going to understand what the concept means as you do it through practice.
Yes, the answer is on the training floor.
Okay, very good. You touched on this briefly, but these days it seems that self-defense is almost a special aspect of karate practice. So if you go to a tournament, something like that, it's a completely separate division. You have your sparring, you have your kata, and then you have your self-defense thing. In the old days, self-defense was primary. That's what people did. The sporting aspect was sort of to hone some of the skills that you use in self-defense, reaction time, speed, things like that. But self-defense was still the primary focus of that. And that seems to be a little bit different these days. So in Shorei-Kan, how much importance is placed on the self-defense aspects as opposed to sporting aspects and things like that?
That is a great question. It is a common supposition amongst all martial artists that there should be a core of the studies should be the self-defense component. But when we get too caught up in being motivated by being a champion or winning a trophy, winning and conquering all the others that came to the tournament that day, then our techniques start shifting toward fine-tuning on that sport-specific rules. And it is my opinion that first should be and most important is the self-defense applicable parts of what we should be learning. Off of that, some people are very motivated by going and competing, and it causes them to train harder and to train more often, and it causes them to be more motivated by having the opportunity to go win a championship. So that is, I think, a very positive part of what modern day martial arts brings to keeping people motivated. But it's important to me that applicable self-defense pieces of it are still maintained as the primary study. Goju Ryu is one of those curriculums that was developed for self-defense because of the environments they were in and what they needed to do to survive and protect their property and their family. However, as we have observed, I've been able to be successful in the sport arena as well with this same curriculum. But when we go to compete, we study the rules, and a couple of weeks ahead of time we will start practicing by those particular rules so that we can be gentlemen in our competition and follow the rules of engagement according to what the stated expectations are. If we get too caught up in focusing on the sport component, then we lose the more serious applications of karate. Like in the sport arena, some rules do not allow punching to the head. That they will allow kicking to the head though. So that causes habits to be formed that make you less precise in your self-defense capabilities. Some curriculums or some rules allow for takedowns, but some allow, they say no takedown, stand up only. So that's another piece of it. Some rules don't let you strike to the legs, some do. So there's such a variety of rules and regulations for martial art competitions that it can cause distractions from the base, the history, the roots of it, which should be primarily around self-defense.
Okay. You had also talked about how that the sporting aspects of it could serve as motivation. One of the things I've often heard is that, and we've known this for decades, it's been discussed in training and what have you, that oftentimes you go into class and you start at the beginning. I mean, in my own training, right? Started with warm-ups, the basics, and then you started working through. And then at the end of the class is when new material is introduced. You get some new material introduced. Well, we know from educational systems, right, that we're less likely to pick it up at the end of the class than we are at the beginning of class. The muscles are already stressed, so the chance of pulling muscles and things like that occur at the end rather than at the beginning. But we still do it that way simply because that was the old way to do it. And I've often heard that one of the things that, particularly America, but and I'll include North America in that statement, but has been good at is introducing new methods of approaching that in a different way, teaching things in a way that people can grasp that better. Certainly, nobody is going to spend 3 years on Sanchin. That's the only kata. You're not going to have a student, right? They're not going to do it. You can't do that. And really, as far as the propagation of the Ryu goes, you want to. I mean, it's a good question on, are you going to do that? Do you want the Ryu to survive, or the system to survive, or are you just going to do it the old way and let it die out, one of the others? But it seems that, like I said, what I'm saying is that I think the Americans have probably, or what I've heard, is have introduced new teaching methods in there that do focus on motivation, which, as I understand it, was Dogen Yamaguchi when he invented Jukumite, right?
Yes.
That's what it was for. It was to promote karate. That didn't. I mean, it had certain advantages, right, to increase speed and things like that. But it was more of a motivational tool that he used, and I heard that his son after that said, bunkai is all you need. The two-person forms are all you need to learn karate, because all things being equal, is going to come out the same.
Yes.
So, but I think, like I said, I've heard that the American systems have introduced some more teaching things, and there are different ways of teaching it that tend to motivate people more and what have you. What's your take on that? I mean, you've trained in Japan, you train in a very traditional system, and what have you.
Yes.
But you also use things like sparring, right? You also engage in some other things that help motivate students. So, what are some of the innovations would be there? What are some of the innovations in teaching that you've noticed, especially over the years, that have become more prominent these days than they have been before, or that you notice in America that you don't see in maybe Japan?
The emphasis on sparring is a big one. Taguchi, at one point in his leadership, had the point of view that sparring was negative for your karate. It actually kept you from learning the serious karate at a higher level, and forbid his students to spar for a long time. Some students were even dismissed as a student because they were caught sparring. Well, the innovation of sparring, I think, is important for the student. I don't think that we need to have it as a primary piece of our curriculum, but to be able to spontaneously move and flow and shift and be comfortable with other people attacking you or coming at you, with the engagement of that, helps develop the spontaneity, and that's important for self-defense. It also develops bravery, because not knowing what that other person is or isn't going to do can cause some people to experience some anxiety in a particular self-defense situation. And I've seen examples, a variety of examples, where they're really good martial artists on the floor, and they may have 15, 20 years experience, and then you watch them in a self-defense position in a fight, and they lean forward and stick their chin out there and swing big like they've never had a good martial art class lesson in their life. But when you watch them on the mat, they're precise, they're powerful, they're fast, their strategies and tactics are on. So the sparring seems to help develop a lot of the things that will settle the brain and give the body the opportunity to use and utilize the tactics of self-defense in a proper way. But sparring, we would like to keep it as realistic as possible, but with, we want to modify it and be disciplined about how we modify it so that we don't have injury. That way we can continue to train and build and grow. So when we start going, well, take away strikes to the joints and for safety reasons, and do not strike the spine for safety reasons, and do not strike the back of the head for back of the neck for safety reasons. All these modifications that we do for safety reasons are prudent, but it does take away the instinctive lessons of ending an engagement very quickly. If you are able to break a spine or dismantle a spine, then if the person is incapable of walking, or they're not going to probably be very effective in their attacks against you. But if you spend too much time in the sport arena, then your instinct is to go back to those sport-specific rules that you train under, instead of every part of the person's anatomy being a potential target to end the engagement quickly.
Okay. So if a new student enters your class, if they come in, what would they expect to encounter in the beginning? And then as they progress through the training, would that change or remain the same? Or how would they begin in training and how would they progress in the training? What could they expect to find?
They would expect a well-developed curriculum that has a systematic method of growing your martial arts training. And they would be able to receive some techniques and strategies and tactics that they could use right away. And they would also, in the same class, be introduced to techniques that may be just a little more difficult to implement right away. So we're working from the top down, but we're also working from the bottom up simultaneously. And developing that and what works out for that student. Realizing that every student is an individual. Different people observe things or understand things in a different way. And so there are times when we may introduce new material right at the beginning and then keep the important parts of the concepts and ideas from which they just been introduced, to maybe change the technique but keep consistent the strategies or the tactics from that. There also may be times where the students need to have a good conditioning class, so we may not work on much new. We may do repetitive techniques, but just do them in a different way. You may do 1,000 front kicks, but we're not just going to kick the pad 1,000 times or kick a heavy bag. You may work on targeting for part of those. You may work on precise distancing and control for part of those. You may work on penetration and power for part of those. You may work on body changing and then using that technique as a part of that too. So there's many different scenarios we can put ourselves through to help develop, say, a front kick. But if we just do 1,000 front kicks, most students today, they will grow bored with it, and it is not mentally, emotionally stimulating enough. So we make adjustments so that we still may do 1,000 front kicks, but we'll do them in different ways.
Okay, so what is the most important thing that a new student coming into your class should know?
Work ethic.
Explain that, please.
If students come in to class and they realize that just because they joined class, they're not going to suddenly become or be transformed into a Ninja Turtle or a Power Ranger or a Chuck Norris, they are going to have to put in work before the results show up. The basics can develop, repeating basics can develop a lot of understanding and wisdom. It's not very often that a student is willing to come in and still stay committed and engaged when only allowed to maybe practice one kata for 3 years. So we practice in a variety of ways, but if they will get to a place where they are willing to do the work and the repetition, just by going and hitting the makiwara is a great example. The first time you start hitting the makiwara, after about 100 hits, you may have some great awarenesses, some amazing satori's. But after that, that may not show up again until you hit it 500 times. So each time you have to have more engagement, more time, more practice and training with that tool to achieve that next level of understanding, the big aha moments, the satori's. But if you'll the student will continue to show up, continue to do the repetition, continue to develop and build themselves, then they will have a lot of in-depth wisdom with a very basic application that is usable, repeatable, consistent, and concise.
So, in many respects, understanding on different levels then. So you do something, and at this particular level, you have a wonderful understanding of that. But when you're doing the same thing, but you move to the different level, all of a sudden, you're sort of back to zero again. You're still at the same, you're still at the same level, yes, pretty much, but just advanced a little bit. But now you have a whole other level to fill with knowledge before, and then the same thing. You're moving up to a different level.
Yes, and so often we look toward achieving that next level, the higher level, but it's absolutely every bit as important that every time you level up, you come back down and examine the basics and train in the basics and develop the basics at that next level. then we may go up even higher the next time to get the next level of height or understanding or the next part of the curriculum. But after that, we still come back down and spend time in those basics. Without those basics, you'll develop bad habits, and those basics with bad habits don't scale effectively into the more advanced principles and concepts.
Which is why you're hitting the Makiwara for 80 years.
Yes.
your technique may not change that much, although it may change some, but the understanding of what you're doing,
Yes.
and even something as simple as a basic punch.
So much depth behind it. In recent studies with examining the benefits of having technologies these days, we can now film ourselves in slow motion hitting Makiwara. So as I film myself hitting Makiwara in slow motion, I can see that I'm starting to rotate that fist just a little too early, which is causing that elbow to kick out just a little too soon, which causes me to lose a lot of power and penetration and potency of that technique. So if I get back to it and I remember to keep that elbow in, keep my lat engaged so that my shoulder will stay down, all of those pieces and principles will continue to build. But if I'm doing it in a method that is really fast and smooth, we may not notice that elbow kicking out just a little too soon. We may not notice that fist rotating a little bit too soon, which causes a chain reaction through the body that causes us to lose power somehow and potency somehow. So if we go back and continue to study even something as basic as a regular punch again and again. I've been doing that regular punch on that Makiwara for over 30 years now. And even with that, still within the last 6 months, I have made more headway and more ground on just how to punch more potently and effectively through demonstrating and studying and, again, hitting that Makiwara again and again.
Okay, so let's pause there for just a moment